Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Venture Crush. I'm Meredith Bouchard. I'm a partner in our ECVC, Emerging Companies Venture Capital Group. A few announcements to get us started, and then we'll do some introductions. So we have a great group here in person. There's also a big group on Zoom. There's a chat on the Zoom. So if you're here in person and you want to participate in the Zoom chat, there should be a QR code that goes up. You can scan that. If you're in the room with us, please don't join the audio on the Zoom. That messes things up for us a little bit. All of the panelists' bios will be linked in the Zoom chat. You can drop questions in the chat as well, and we'll try to get to them during the discussion. Also, introduce yourselves. Please share your LinkedIn. Lots of people helped put this together. We're very grateful to our Lowenstein Sandler colleagues, Nathan Schultz, Lauren Russell, Henry Zhu. They helped do all the research for today, and our events team, Jenny, Ginny, Angela, Karen, Owen, Ariel, Christina, Emerson, Britt, Carrie. We couldn't do anything without you. We have a couple events coming up this fall that we're excited about. The next one of these events will be November 7th. That'll have Erica from Rain Ventures. You can sign up for that in the Zoom chat. And even before then, October 30th, we'll have an in-person Women in VC event that we're really excited about. We'll be joined by some of our Palo Alto-based female partners for that, so that's a special treat for us. And I want to welcome a couple of our new partners. So we're joined by John Horton, who sits in our Palo office usually, but he's here today. He joined us from Goodwin this month. He's a Bay Area local. He's been there for 25 years, has a degree from Stanford, and he represents startups and growth companies and investment funds. So we're really excited he's joined our team. He is our second partner in just a few months to join from Goodwin. We also announced that our past Venture Crush, Abe Kwan, joined in our New York office. And then we're also joined today by Courtney Posner, who joined from Echo Street and is in our funds group. And now on to today's panelists and events.
This is always a fun session because we get to go to school a little bit with Professor Jeff, who's going to explain product market fit, and I guess it's subtitled like the stuff you'd remember if you had taken the class 5 years ago. And there's some lingo and some slides. So let's do that, and then we'll have like panel introductions and get into the meat of the topic. But tell us what we would have forgotten had we taken the class recently.
Okay, so Ed has given me a daunting task, which is to synthesize and summarize a 2-year, $160,000 Harvard Business School MBA in 7 minutes. And for those who don't know, I teach at HBS an entrepreneurship class, and I've been doing that for 14 years in addition to my venture capital work at Flybridge. And I've done this talk over the past years, and I actually had to completely reboot the talk this year. And this is the first time I've given this version, so thank you for being a part of this experiment, because I'm going to try out some new ideas on you. These are ideas that have been informed by a lot of my research and a lot of my work in the power of AI to help accelerate the product market fit journey. That was not a topic in past years because the tools weren't available. But now we're in a very unique moment. And you all as entrepreneurs are very blessed in being sort of arriving at this moment where you can accelerate your 0 to 1 journey in theory by leveraging these amazing tools. So this talk, which was generated by AI, it's very meta. And the way I generated this talk using the Gamma AI presentation platform is that I'm writing a new book called The Experimentation Machine, Finding Product Market Fit in the Age of AI. And I asked ChatGPT to take my 300-page book, synthesize and summarize it into 3 pages, and then I asked Gamma AI to take those 3 pages and summarize it into 7 slides. And that took me 15 minutes. And then I took a few minutes to edit it, and here we are. But the ideas are very straightforward and ones that perhaps you've heard from others before, but just to kind of lay the groundwork, you all know about the 10x developer. That's the software developer who's 10x more productive than the average developer because they're so talented. I believe my theory of the world today is that we're in a moment, an age of the 10x founder. that the tools available to you all as founders will allow you to be 10x more productive in your journey. There's this apocryphal idea that there might be a unicorn founder who builds a company with one employee. I'm not sure that's quite right. That's something that Sam Altman has said. But I do think that there might be a unicorn founder that builds a company leveraging these AI tools with 10 employees or 20 employees and has one 10x marketer, one 10x product manager, one 10x salesperson, and the 10x founder at the helm. So that's the vision and I think the future that we're heading into. And so if you think about the journey from product market fit and taking a page from Steve Blank and taking a page from Eric Ries and the Lean Startup and the Lean Canvas, there's this very structured process that goes from ideation through customer discovery, through go-to-market experiments, through business model scaling. And if you think about that entire pipeline of activities, what I believe is that you as a founder can inject AI into each one of those activities, not necessarily if you're an AI company or not. You don't have to be an AI company. You just have to be an AI native founder. And that's the trick for all of you, not to build AI companies necessarily, but to become AI native founders and to leverage these tools to accelerate your ideation process, using the tools for customer discovery, for persona development, and all the types of things in developing your ideal customer profile. And you can use the common tools like ChatGPT, or you can use some specialized tools that many startups are building for each of these areas. Secondly is enhanced customer discovery. You can do customer research, product development, MVP development using these incredible product development tools like Cursor and GitHub Copilot, GitLab's tool, never mind the general code generation that ChatGPT allows. And then, of course, automating sales and marketing. By my last count, there are over 100 startups doing AI for sales development and sales acceleration, whether it's an AI sales engineer or an AI BDR or SDR or creating and generating RFPs using AI. All of these incredible tools are available to you to accelerate this process without needing to hire. It used to be you would be obsessed with hiring when you would build your startup. In fact, we used to tell, as venture capitalists, we used to tell founders, get a recruiter as one of your first hires so that you can start your hiring machine. Now you all need to build and address these capabilities using AI tools and AI bots. And that's going to be the main page that you're going to have, playbook you're going to have to execute. So taking a page from experimental design, this is the idea of taking what I'll characterize as timeless techniques of the product market fit journey, following the lean startup methodology, taking this scientific approach, building these tests, testing the hypotheses that matter most to your business model, and really finding the key valuation inflection points in your business model that you can test, but then leveraging AI tools to run more tests faster and accelerated with fewer resources. I like to say test selection is strategy. In this environment, you can run an infinite number of tests. And so the tests you select, only you as the founder can make those decisions. That's the most important part of your strategic journey. So even though you can accelerate your testing and expand your testing throughput, you need to have a very top-down strategic lens on test selection and test execution. And I'll just give you two very quick case studies and then a final thought before I wrap. One is one of our Flybridge portfolio companies, a company called Teal. It's a B2C platform for job seekers. It helps you find jobs, apply for jobs. It allows you to use AI to customize your resume and generate cover letters and to seek out jobs based on listings that might be a fit for you and your interests. They have leveraged AI not only in their product, but also in their go-to-market quite dramatically. They started with a lot of content writing to generate SEO, to generate leads, and then top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel, get to conversions. They have basically fired the entire copywriting staff, replaced it with an AI generator, generate a ton of content, tens of thousands of pages, very precisely targeted for certain job types. So machine learning engineer in university setting, or project manager in healthcare services in the Northeast, and just generate a ton of content around those topics, which generates a ton of traffic, which helps accelerate their activities, all without spending any money on staff. And they've dramatically accelerated their go-to-market and their pipeline and their revenue as a result of that. Second case study is a B2B company, Allspice. This is a GitHub for hardware engineers. It's a cloud-based collaboration platform for hardware product developers. In their case, they're using tools like HeyGen and 11 Labs to generate automatically personalized demos for target customers. So they can generate a video which demos their product, targeted at, say, Maria or Ed, has all the individual information about them, delivers that automatically to their target customer, and now has a personalized video with a human speaking, let's say Ed's avatar, but it's like looks just like Ed, speaking about that customer, about their needs, and doing a product demo. And then they use a very sophisticated AI-infused email drip campaign lead gen nurturing pipeline, which has allowed them to become way more productive with very few salespeople. In fact, it's still mostly founder-driven sales and one sales rep at this stage, and they've also scaled very rapidly as a result of their using these AI tools. The final couple things, I'll just throw some terminology out there, because I'm sure we'll talk about this. In the journey to product market fit, I've got this framework I call the Hunch framework, which has these 5 categories of things that, as a founder, you want to look for, and just rapidly to run through them. It's a hair on fire, very, very compelling value proposition, must have, not nice to have. You see usage being very high, early usage and engagement, repeated engagement. So not just one-time usage, but people coming back over and over again. Very high net promoter score or customer satisfaction score. Also, the 40% test is used here. That's sometimes known as the superhuman test or the Sean Ellis test, which is if the product were to be taken away, would 40% of the users be highly disappointed? So you can imagine the products in your universe that if they were taken away, highly disappointed, you'd have product market fit. Churn is low. B2C, you look for cohort curves, B2B cohort curves and net dollar retention. And then finally, unit economics attractive, a high LTV to CAC ratio, that is lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. I know I'm going fast, I'm sorry, but the slides will be available, and I just want to put out some content to lay the groundwork. Okay. The final thing I'll say is product market fit does not necessarily mean you have a great business or a very valuable business. We have seen many case studies in my 30 years of doing this of a lot of companies that hit product market fit but are bad business models, and those companies fail. So you have to not only be very focused as a founder on the product market fit journey and that 0 to 1 process, leveraging modern AI tools as noted, but you also have to think strategically about the quality of your business model and building a business model that is actually going to be sustainable and enduring and valuable. And there is a framework that we have for that. I'll end there. I'll skip this last slide, which is about ethics. Not that I don't want to talk about ethics, but because I know you're going to ask about it, because he's a lawyer, and we're going to talk about ethics and social responsibility and bias, I'm sure, in this panel, because a lot of us are very involved in that topic. And with that, I don't know how I did on time. I think that was
Great.
about 7 minutes. That, for you, is the $160,000 Harvard Business School MBA degree, not included. Thank you.
And because we're still using the Harvard Business School model, everybody here got the highest possible grade and an award at graduation, right? Okay. So hopefully everyone got that and understands exactly what LTV to CAC means, and we'll do a deeper dive on that. And I did not give your incredible credentials with your 20 plus years, I think, at Flybridge and teaching, and this is not your first, second, or third book, it's your 4th or 5th book? Third, okay. And the books get great reviews. I have read them and loved them, and I do think one of the nice things about having Jeff at this event, two, one, it's an excuse to get to hang out with my friend Jeff, but also Jeff was one of the first people when we started this in 2008 who climbed on board and said, this is a good idea, I will come down from Boston and our firm will get involved and support this. And you and your colleagues have been an integral part of this and an integral part of the New York marketplace, at least ever since 2008 when we did the first version of this, and you were coming even before that for some of the other events that we were doing. So really appreciate that very much. Before we do the other panelists, I do have one question because you had Allspice up there. Allspice was the 100th investment Flybridge made into a female-founded company, and at the time, you had 150 female founders in the portfolio. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you also improved over time, and that was very intentional. So I was delighted to see the reference to Allspice in your slides.
Yeah. Man, you do your homework. So briefly, we realized many years ago that there was an opportunity to invest in more female founders and reach more female founders in a way that we didn't think other venture firms were seeing. And so we created a platform and a fund called X Factor Ventures, which was specifically focused on backing and being the first check behind female-founded startups. And we recruited a team of now 20 female CEOs, folks like the founders of Figs, and the founder of Maven, and the founder of Chief, and the founder of many other great companies, to be a part of our investment team that would help us in expanding our deal flow and expanding our footprint in those networks. We have a belief that it's very hard to break homophily, the sense that people like to interact with and build relationships with people who are like them. And so why not, play judo and leverage homophily and create networks of underrepresented founders who turn into investors who help you get access in a way that you might not otherwise. So that's sort of was our insight 8 years ago or so when we started X Factor Ventures.
Awesome. Thank you, and kudos for the work. You've been a leader on diversity and talking about the issues and surfacing hard conversations. There's a 2022 post that you wrote where you were one of the first people who looked like the two of us to denounce something that was happening in venture on social media that was really important to denounce, and you've been a great voice, and I admire that, and maybe you can talk a little bit about facing history, and then we'll go to Maria.
Yeah, so I'm on the board of an organization that knows called Facing History and Ourselves, which fights racism and anti-Semitism by taking an education program into schools, typically middle and high schools. And actually, the New York City Public Schools recently announced that they're bringing Facing History into all of the New York City public schools. It's a curriculum that looks at case studies like the Holocaust and the Civil Rights Movement and apartheid in South Africa, and teaches kids those histories, and then reflects on those histories regarding current issues of bigotry, racism, and anti-Semitism.
And you're a newcomer to that board because you joined in 93?
Yeah, 1993.
So, amazing.
Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
getting my sea legs.
Yeah, because from an ethics and governance perspective, they should be rotating you off. I'm just saying. I know they don't teach that stuff at Harvard, but I'm just saying. All right. So, Maria, you studiously avoided taking Jeff's class when you went to HBS, and was it the bad reviews he got, or you just didn't like him personally? So wait, before you answer. So you're unique in that you've been a partner at a venture fund in London, where you worked for years investing across Europe. You're now a partner at a very successful venture fund in San Francisco, and you spent the first 5+ years in venture here at a very historic New York venture fund. You also worked in a startup that you helped scale, and you've done amazing stuff and written really interesting things. And so your perspective, there are very few people who could possibly have your perspective on venture, so we're always excited to have you back here with us in New York, so thank you.
Very glad to be in New York. The cab driver almost kicked me out of my cab so fast when I got to my hotel. He's like, the lights changed, and I was like, I love you. I could just kiss you. I like that everyone here has a sense of time. It's much more my DNA. It's my biggest life regret, not taking Jeff's course. No, truthfully, I did go to HBS, and I had a great experience there. And I was very busy burning myself out trying to build a startup actually in Brazil at the time and cross-registered at the undergrad learning Portuguese and MIT, so that's probably my excuse. But if I had known how amazing Jeff was at the time, I definitely would have taken it.
It's worked out just fine.
Is it like n equals 1, the number of people who pass on your class to take Intro to Portuguese? Sorry.
Yeah, very glad to be here.
And do you want to just give us a little bit of insight into the culture shock, subtle though it may be, between like New York venture, London, San Francisco?
Yeah, I think all three are very different ecosystems. And what I was the biggest shell shock, but I most enjoy about the European ecosystem is it's much more raw, I'll call it that. So there's not as much coaching of founders, which I personally like. It was a little bit of a scare. One of my very first Fridays looking at deals, I remember there was 2 deals in a row on Friday. I was meeting with founders, and they both had 5-year projections that went to less than $5 million. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And the first one, I was like, but then I was like curious, okay, what's going on here? And one of them, I think, was just not really a venture-backable business, and we had that chat. But the other founder told me, like, yeah, that's if I bootstrap. And then if I raise money, I can scale a lot faster than that. And I was like, okay, well, next time you talk to a venture capitalist, maybe put in the projections with funding. But I actually love it because it's very genuine, and you do have to understand the cultural differences. Like, if I'm talking to a founder from Denmark, I have to, like, overcorrect because they're not going to brag about themselves. So if they said they were, like, mildly bad at something, they were probably very good at it. And so you have to kind of know the different cultures. And I think that that's just a helpful exercise in general to remind yourself that you have a lot of bias coming from different things. And so trying to understand this person's context and what it means in that, which also is important on reference calls. The New York ecosystem is very special. I think a lot of people will tout the sort of the obvious stuff of customers in your backyard and great industries, many proliferation of industries here, which is true. But I think it's a magical community is the way I'll call it. I think that it's very collaborative. People really want to build this ecosystem together, and I really love that. And SF, ask me again after it's been more than a year. I think AI right now really put SF back on the map, super honestly. I think it was losing ground, and it came back with a vengeance with some of the stuff going on in AI. It's everywhere, obviously, but the ecosystem there is incredible. As a venture industry, I will say it's obviously been the leader for a long, long time. I think the interesting thing, though, is that it's, as an industry, venture backs the most innovative stuff in the world, and yet very rarely as an industry innovates on itself. And so I think that probably is more felt in SF than anywhere else because it's the origination. And so I think as I think about what should be better and different all the time about venture, that's something I just keep in the back of my head.
And you talked about bias on reference calls, which I'd love to do a little bit more on in a few minutes. But can you talk a little bit about a debiasing endeavor of your own at NYC Blend and when you started it and how?
Yes. 2017, which for ground everyone was like big Me Too movement moment. I was running I was at RRE, and I think I was kind of sick of being in the same rooms, having the same conversations with nothing actually changing. And so I wanted to do something. I didn't know exactly what that was, but there was also something I remember very distinctly at a rooftop in Chelsea at our house talking to my husband and saying, like, there was a lot of pressure, like, go do something for women. And I absolutely love doing stuff for women, but I was like, there's something that's not sitting with me with that. And I realized when I was talking to my husband, I was like, for me, I am a straight white cis female. So that experience of like breastfeeding in board meetings and the things that I've gone through is experience that I would understand because it's me. And so for me, diversity and inclusion is something that looks different than that. Is it a Black founder, an LGBTQ founder, Latina founder, like an experience that isn't my own experience. And so it was very important for me, if I was gonna put my name and sweat and blood and tears and lots of extra time outside of regular work hours, doing something to make sure that it had a much more integrated definition of what underrepresented means at the time. And so we kind of used like the FOMO of venture to build scale. So I think we got 88 venture funds in New York the first go around, but basically we got together, and it was not just me, it was me and 10 other people in venture built a nonprofit called NYC Blend, which was basically helping underrepresented founders get access to venture. Went through a couple of iterations, some that really didn't work and then some that did. And the thing that we found that worked best, because a lot of things that are well-intentioned, like office hours, I think fall down for many reasons. And I don't have any answers, but I think if you learn what doesn't work, you can get to something that works. The best version we had was we stopped everything that hadn't worked, interviewed about 100 people, founders and VCs, understood both sides of what was happening. And then we launched sort of like a sponsorship program, like a big brother, big sister in a way, which went live as George Floyd happened. And so there was 3 or 4 Black founders in that cohort, and definitely some interesting good and bad things happened as a reaction. But what we found is that it was good to just have someone who knew the inside baseball of venture to help. So we paired, an underrepresented founder with someone in venture, and that was your person until you raised your round. So if it was 3 weeks or 3 years, they would just help you. Here's more introductions. Here's how to negotiate the term sheet. Have you tried this type of fund? And I think that was really helpful. But yeah, I think that's the only thing we found that it worked so far.
Awesome. And so before we move on to Austin for a minute, and then Meredith will ask like some actual substantive questions, I'm just going to pause because we're talking about inclusion. And one of the thematic components of Venture Crush, one of the pieces of our ethos that we try to spread is making sure that everyone has a seat at the table. There are a handful of folks standing in the back of the room. There are some seats up front. 2 of them have reserved signs. They're reserved for you. Come down. Please grab a seat. There are some seats over there as well. I know we don't have many seats left, but we would love to make sure that you're comfortable while you're joining us. So thank you for helping us create seats at the table for you folks. Okay, so Austin, I want you to think about a 20-mile stretch and where you've chosen to locate in that 20-mile stretch. Congrats on raising a second fund with $100 million as announced and reported on in the last several weeks. We are, for Slauson & Co., the venture firm that you co-founded and co-run. It is not your first venture gig. You are a seasoned veteran, and I know that we at First Close Partners, where we invest in venture funds, are proud to be LPs in both Fund 1 and Fund 2, and appreciate you allowing us to be part of that. And so if you could tell us a little bit about your background and about Slauson and also the 20-mile stretch of road.
Sure. First and foremost, want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. Ed, you do so much wonderful work, and this is amazing to walk into this energy. I went to NYU. I was applying to business school in 2009, 2010, and the venture ecosystem out here looked a bit different. It was when it was really starting to come up to begin with. Well, you might argue that it started at a different date. But anyway, this is just great energy. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Austin Clements. I'm the managing partner, one of the 2 managing partners at Slauson & Co. We're a pre-seed and seed stage fund rooted in the idea of economic inclusion. To give you a little bit of background on myself, I actually started my career in investment management, I guess now 20 years ago, or close to 20 years ago, doing private wealth. And I fell in love with investing at that stage. Really, really loved just understanding what was happening with the markets and found myself gravitating to technology. I ended up leaving to start a dev shop. I ran a dev shop. I was doing web and mobile development for a lot of small businesses. Had a lot of clients here in New York and in LA where we're based. And then decided to sort of take that work. I enjoyed working with entrepreneurs that are building small businesses, and I enjoyed working with technology. And then I started reading more about it in TechCrunch, and saw this industry called venture capital. Like when I was doing private wealth, it was really mainly focused on publicly traded companies and things like that, so stocks and bonds. But when I started to read about venture capital, it's like, oh, it's combining entrepreneurship, it's combining technology, and it's combining like working with all the things that I like, investing basically. And so I was like, venture capital is supposed to be the thing that I'm supposed to be doing with my career, no doubt. Haven't looked back since. And then I just needed to find a way to get into it. And to Ed's point about the 20-mile stretch and sort of where I'm from, there are not a lot of people that end up in venture. Our firm is called Slauson & Co. And Slauson Avenue is a thoroughfare that runs through South Los Angeles. It's a 20-mile stretch inland. It starts in a very blue-collar area, and very industrial. It goes through a low-income but very culturally rich, primarily Black and Latino neighborhood. And then it actually ends in some neighborhoods that represent some of the highest concentrations of minority wealth in the country. And that journey is basically a metaphor for the work that we do. And it also happens to be the street that myself and my partner, who I've known for 25 plus years, we've been friends since high school, grew up right around. And so we both ended up making it into venture, independent of one another, and stayed friends and traded notes. And we're the only two people that are from where we're from at parties talking about venture capital, investing in tech startups. And then eventually we realized, it's great that we're backing all these companies that are going on to be big. He has backed a bunch of consumer household names very early on, Ring, DoorDash, BuildPack, stuff like that. And I was more on the B2B side. But we realized that there are people that are just as talented in the neighborhood that we grew up in neighborhoods like that all around the country. And so what if we took what we know to be true about venture capital and applied it to things that where we're more inherently more comfortable and can find folks that have historically been overlooked or underserved. And that was the impetus for creating Slauson & Co.
And you gave an interview a couple of years ago in which you said that at some point in 2018, you were thinking about people you knew, your friends, people you'd worked with, and you decided that your partner was one of the people in whom you wanted to invest more in terms of your relationship with him. And I loved the thoughtfulness of that and the idea of, as an investor, where am I going to put my emotional, my personal capital? And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Number one, how do you think about the ROI on that investment? And number two, how often do you sit back and take that evaluative step?
Yeah. So what Ed's referring to, first of all, you do your homework. That's quite impressive. But it was, so every year I people make New Year's resolutions. One of the things that I do is I write down 5 people who I want to build a relationship with and invest in. And it's the people that we all have in our lives that are people that I really like. Every time I hang out with that person, gives me more energy. I get enthusiastic about them, but we never make time for each other, or we just kind of see each other in passing. But it's being very, very intentional about trying to invest in 5 people. That means a couple of, once a month, and you'll see all 5 of those people twice a year or whatnot. My partner AJ was one of those people. We would always, we would talk to each other. We would always bounce ideas. We'd always leave more energized. And when we got there, we have totally different personalities and totally complementary skills. And one year he made that list, or he was on that list of mine, and we just started hanging out toward the end of the year, and he owns a coffee shop called Hilltop Coffee and Kitchen with Issa Rae, if you guys know her. She's a producer and actress. But we would hang out at his coffee shop, and we just look around at the people doing, as he refers to it, coffee shop shit, which is basically building businesses, talking to their friend, knocking out ideas and whatnot. And we just realized that there's so much energy, and a lot of people are disconnected from the capital or the resources or the connections. And we spend quite a bit of time building a lot of those. And so we just decided to work together after a bunch of different discussions. I'm always advising people, particularly first-time founders, to spend as much time investing in their team and who they're going to work with as they do thinking about refining the ideas of their product, especially at the earliest stages, the foundational stages when it's idea phase. And it's I figure I have to do the same thing. I have to be very thoughtful about who it was. I could find another person who was like me, who had all my same skill sets, and we were repeating and finishing each other's sentences, or I could find somebody who thinks completely different than me and challenges what I have, and then we make each other better, and that's what I ended up going with.
Your comment, this is my last question, and then Meredith, but your comment about I could find someone who looks like me, and we have like I probably shouldn't do this, we have the 3 waves of venture here.
Yeah.
Jeff went to Harvard, and then probably went to Harvard a few more times.
Still am.
Maria went to a public university undergrad, which like very few people in venture, when you entered venture, did. And you went to an HBCU, which when you entered venture, no one in venture, like 2 people, 3 people in venture had undergrad degrees from an HBCU. You also have been on the board of HBCU VC. Can you talk a little bit about that? And am I off in thinking like these are 3 waves? Like the woman who went to the public university is definitely wave 2, and you're wave 3?
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a fair way to think about it. So I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Formative experience for me. I loved it. I guess most people's college experiences, but like for me, I think it both taught expectations for what you're going to deliver in your career and also your role in society. I always say, like, as a black man in America, I feel like I have a social obligation beyond just me getting as rich as I possibly can. Like, I have to give back, I have to contribute in ways that enhance my community broadly. I very much feel that weight, and I every day. Morehouse was a great experience, and one that defined me. And I know that a lot of people who went to HBCUs feel the same way about their school. HBCU VC is a nonprofit organization. If you guys haven't heard of it, it's phenomenal. It was founded by a woman named Hadia Mujahid. She's amazing and very, very dedicated to opening up and creating pathways for students that go to HBCUs to understand venture capital and technology more broadly. I was one of the founding board members of the organization. We created programs that have created internships. We probably had, I don't know, at least 100 students be placed in internships, and several dozen that now have full-time roles in venture capital and now have say on how capital is allocated. So definitely some of the work that I'm most proud of is, opening doors for people beyond me.
Can I say something on this for a second? Because I think, to your point, there's sounds like an amazing organization, by the way. There's also a geography point of D&I that is a little bit left untouched sometimes, definitely like economically as well. But I grew up in rural Wisconsin. I went to University of Wisconsin undergrad. And I, for a little while, before I had a second child, and decided to stop serving on these things, served on the advisory board for the engineering department of industrial engineering, which is where I went there. And part of the reason I did that was that nobody even had ever heard of venture capital, barely heard of startups. Like, there's no discussion in Wisconsin about that as a career path. And because everyone goes to the career fairs and gets, like, I started at GE in manufacturing, they just go to the employers they see. And I think especially outside the coast, it's just not, there's no paths into that job. I would have never even heard of it. So I think there's a lot of elements of diversity and inclusion like that, where it's just good to have outreach and understanding for students as they're making these decisions about where they go in life.
100% agree.
I spend a lot of time on that too, and we've been trying to get into more universities and teach undergrads about opportunities in venture, so we can talk more about that. So it strikes me that all 3 of you have really worked hard to expand access to venture capital markets for folks who didn't necessarily know they were there or how to find their way in. But Maria, one other thing you've done that I think is pretty different is on the website for the fund, you invite folks to reach out to you directly, that they don't need a warm intro. And I found the question you were asking, I was hoping you could talk about it a little bit, really interesting, of how you want people to introduce themselves to you so you can begin your understanding of who they are.
Yeah, this was Del from Backstage Capital, actually. This is one of those conversations where somebody thinks differently from you and you like go a lot of directions, but then it pushes you to be better. The warm intro is a real problem for venture, and pros and cons to that we can all talk about. But I think sometimes when we focus on that problem, we forget that like we can change that and there's different options. Like, I didn't know anyone in venture before I got rejected by half the community and then met half the community, and that's a way to build a network. It's probably better ways. But also there's ways to kind of learn about someone that you don't know. And so Dell was kind of being he and I were talking one day about why the challenge with cold inbound and how everyone ignores it. And he was saying, like, if it was an engineering test, you could put a test on the website, and if they pass the test, they can talk to you. And I was like, but I'm a generalist investor, so I'm like, I can't do that. And then I was like, you know what, actually I can. If I really push myself, like, what is something that is true for every founder I meet? And I really over-index on teams, and I think about how they lead people and how they grow themselves. And so if you go on our website, and this is actually pretty true for most funds I've been at, I just have something on there that says, if I don't know you, please title the email this and answer this question about your own leadership journey and how you've evolved, and send me your pitch deck. And if you answer that question and you title that email that way, I will always respond and I will always look at it. And I actually get those quite a bit. I get a couple a week. And I haven't actually invested in one yet, but I have come close very many times actually. So I think it's just creating other spaces and ways to do it that might be big or small. And I will say I'm very, if I get a really good answer to the question and I can tell they were really thoughtful about it, even if it's not a space I would invest in, I'm actually trying to be way more helpful, even if it's not for me.
And why is there evolution the point that you were double clicking?
So the question is, what's your personal evolution? I think we should all be trying to be better versions of ourselves, right? And at the end of the day, even just thinking about what it takes to go find product market fit and be a 10x founder, you have to change yourself along that journey for what the company needs and what the people around you need. And if you can't demonstrate that you've done that in some other dimension to date, it's going to be hard for you to go on that journey. And it's a check of self-awareness. It's also a check of your own evolution with time, as we should all be able to say, right? We should all be able to point to things 10 years ago that I'm like, oh, I can't believe I was like that.
And then, Austin, speaking of evolution, you launched a fund at the moment the pandemic started. So you had to be constantly evolving. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how that shaped the fund and your outlook?
Yeah, so we actually started putting together the fund, started talking to people in late 2019, and we basically got nowhere. We started talking about this idea of economic inclusion. We invest in everybody. That's been foundational in the first ideation Google Doc that we put together. We talked about that, and the idea basically. We had a few conversations where people were moderately interested in what we were saying, and then the pandemic happened, the market crashed for a couple weeks or whatnot, and the basically all conversations just kind of stopped. And mind you, in 2019, I left my job, my full-time job as I was working at a venture firm. And I said that basically I gave myself, I think it was 6 months or something like that, 8 months to get to a first close, basically to get the fund going. And I drastically mistimed how long it would take. And the reality is I had to think about all right, is it time for me to go back and get a job, or do I continue to pursue this? And two things happened that sort of catalyzed them. One that was good and one that was bad. First was the murder of George Floyd. Obviously a horrific incident, but it was one that changed the dynamic and the social fabric of the country. What happened after that, though, was there was a wave of people that social unrest, and then there was a wave of people rethinking how they do business and trying to take more inclusive practices to what they were doing. And we certainly benefited from that. People were like, oh, we talked to two guys before that were kind of saying this message. Both of them worked in venture before, so it's not like they have no idea what's going on, and they're just taking advantage. And they've been saying this before it was kind of popular, if you will. The other thing that happened was we connected with a guy by the name of Ron Conway, who is the founder of SV Angel, kind of like the Silicon Valley godfather, if you will. And he's opened up a lot of doors for us to meet everything from investors to founders who have built multi-billion-dollar companies, and many of them ended up investing in our fund. So we were very fortunate that on our very first fund, we have a slew of founders that are sort of of companies of household names, and then also other funds that are investors. Ron probably helped us get maybe a third of the capital that was ultimately a $75 million fund. And so just those two things kind of came together to start something. And then, we had a bunch of other conversations. I'm very involved in philanthropy, so I have a lot of foundation relationships, and we have a bunch of foundations that came in as well. But it was basically, we moved from pitching, and I encourage this for all founders as well, we moved from pitching people to enrolling people. Like, it was no longer, I'm trying to convince you of that this is important. It is, this is what we do, this is what we got, let me know if you're on board with this whole thing. We are not hard sell people, never have been. We will follow up with you several times, but like, but we will, we're not angry. I'm not mad at the people that pass on us or anything like that. But it's just about finding your tribe, and in many cases it's a numbers game. But it comes with being very clear about who you are and say these are the type of people that we want on board.
So I love the idea of moving from pitching to enrolling, and particularly in the context of a discussion about product market fit. And Jeff, you gave us definitions and explanations of product market fit. Is that one of them, when it feels like you're going from the insanely uphill climb of pitching to enrolling the willing?
Yeah, there's a concept in marketing people know about push versus pull, and if you have a great product, it should have an organic pull to it. And if you find that you're pushing and really struggling, then you don't have product market fit. There's a phrase that some of our colleagues like to use, which is radical product market fit, which is where it's so obvious, the product is so meets the need in such a compelling fashion that you can let it speak for itself. And you often hear the language about product-led growth, which is very popular in a B2B context, or virality, which is very popular in a B2C context, where people are speaking about your product because it's such high quality and so good. So yeah, that's the magic. If you really nail it, then you get that pull effect, and ideally this flywheel effect that begins to generate a lot of momentum.
Can we get some examples maybe from each of you of where it looked like product market fit, but it was a false positive? Because it is confusing to understand when you have it.
Sure. I'll think of some. I don't want to throw any existing portfolio companies under the bus, but what happens is when a lot of times there's a lot of things that people mistake for traction or product market fit. I'll start with kind of the basics. TechCrunch article about you is not product market fit, right? Like, where a lot of people feel like the press and a lot of attention coming your way means that there is something. So that's probably the basic, easiest one everybody could universally agree on. Then I think that when you kind of go up a step, it's a lot of times when you're selling a product, but the product, again, it's more of a push motion than a pull, where the discussions that you're having look a lot like you're compromising or trying to sell people on things that you didn't necessarily intend were like the core features. One thing that comes to mind is there's a company that we invested in that had a workflow tool for a particular industry. It's both a marketplace and a workflow tool, and they want to position themselves as a workflow tool. They want the people in this industry to say, like, all right, I've managed my business, and this software helps me manage my business a lot better. But when you talk to their customers, a lot of times they're like, oh, why'd you sign up for this? Like, oh, they told me they would give me better prices in the marketplace. And it's like, okay, well, how's the workflow tool part? And they'll say, oh, we use it, but like in hopes that we could get better prices. And what the company founder knows is that better pricing is not a sustainable advantage based on how their business and industry are set up. And so in some cases, you could sort of kid yourself and say like, this person is on board with what we're doing and we got this customer and they're signed up. But the reality is your value proposition is actually not resonating with them in that circumstance, in which case that the economics over time and what they're buying and what you need to invest in won't match up to being a lucrative business. So that's an example.
I can give another kind of pile on to this framing, and Austin talked a little bit about certain signals that lead to false positives, and one of the kind of categories you put on this is vanity metrics. So TechCrunch articles, as well as say downloads or clicks or signups, those are all lovely vanity metrics. What's that?
I said wait list.
Waitlist signups, email addresses, but actually usage is the magic thing to focus on. Churn or lack of repeat usage is a lagging indicator, but the leading indicator is actual usage. And so I was an investor in a B2C app that was a very hot social app. It got on an amazing hockey stick growth curve. It started spreading virally in its target community, which was high school kids, and yet the ongoing, enduring usage just wasn't there. The users would play with it, they'd post some things, they'd explore it, they'd connect with some friends, but then it didn't have that sticky, enduring value. And when you looked at the usage pattern, it became very clear that, and these are terms people may know in the B2C world, like L7, L14, L21, which are logins on day 7, logins on day 14, logins on day 21 after download, was like a sharp curve down. It was like a cliff. As opposed to when you see great B2C apps after download and after activation, you see this nice, beautiful, enduring login pattern in 7 days and 14 days and 21 days. So, a lot of these examples, there's B2B examples. Again, Austin's kind of hinted at this workflow software package, which was a B2B example. People may do pilots, but then you're stuck in pilot purgatory and you never go beyond the pilot. Some of you perhaps can relate to that. In this audience, that's a common issue right now with AI software companies. They're getting a ton of pilots, a lot of experiments, no rollouts. They are stuck in pilot purgatory and they are not getting spread throughout the entire organization. So those are sort of these false positives that you have to watch out for.
Yeah, for me, there's, I'll give a quick B2B and B2C. I think sometimes it's exactly what you said, Jeff, but it's sometimes the same message with a different audience actually becomes product market fit. Sometimes you're selling the right thing, but to the wrong audience. And then I saw one of those in a B2B context where they had like who they thought was their customer and a stakeholder, and then they flipped it basically, and the stakeholder became the customer, and it took off in a very different way. And I think that on the B2C side, sometimes you've hit product market fit in a weird way because they let you, a lot of other things are forgiven. I'll call it that. Like there's a company where I feel like they got the wrong product hire like 3 times and the product has not been improved in like 18 months, but they still keep growing like gangbusters because for the pain point, they're hitting a nerve so deeply in what they're doing that like it just keeps growing. And so there you feel like you've definitely hit product market fit. It's now how do we make it an actual business, not just solving a need.
So you've all been in these situations with your investment companies where they haven't quite got it right. And we had a discussion with a bunch of founders right before this, and one of the questions coming out of that was, how do you know when it's time to pivot? Are you having those conversations with the founders in whom you've invested, and how does that go?
Absolutely. The first one that I gave you was actually a founder where I sat her down after her, like she pitched the whole board in January of like, here's the plan for the year. And everyone kind of nodded and the numbers looked good. And then she said, it just didn't feel right. And I went up to her and I was like, let's just pause for a second, because very rarely am I giving this kind of prescriptive advice, but I had been close enough to this for a while to feel like I was like, I don't even know if anyone could hit those numbers. I think if anyone can, it's you. But I also don't know if we hit those numbers, if it's actually going to prove anything that matters around true product market fit. Even if we hit these this year, do you really think you can scale in this audience? Like, is this actually going to take off the way you want it to? And I just posed the question. I didn't necessarily even have a view. I just wasn't sure. It felt like we had put together some numbers that the last round of investors wanted to see, that we thought we might be able to hit, and we thought was the right target. But it wasn't necessarily going to prove that we could really scale. And so she went back to the drawing board, talked to a bunch of customers. She actually went and did a bunch of kind of secondary research, talking to customers she hadn't talked to in a while because the salespeople were, and then kind of came to the conclusion with the board that they should pivot a bit the message and who they were selling to, and slightly the product as well.
I'll say, I think one thing that came to mind with the question that you just asked, there's a book by Mike Maples, who runs a fund called Floodgate, called Pattern Breakers, relatively new book that I highly recommend, where the framework that he sort of builds upon is that there's you start the business with sort of an inflection point. This is something that's kind of basically out of your control entirely. It's just a macro event or something that's happened that's created a shift in the way that people are operating or doing things. And then on top of that inflection point, there's an insight. There's something that you have that you understand about this inflection point that may run a little bit contrary to how most people are interpreting it. And this is part of your approach. And then the sort of last level is like the idea. So like, all right, I have this insight that, people will stay in other people's houses, and rent them or something like that. So this idea on top of that is that you sort of build the product around the idea. And so when I think about pivots, I think about it like at what level you are pivoting. A lot of times if the insight remains intact, then it's like different tactics around trying to explore whether that insight is actually, you can build a business on top of that insight. So, if you believe in something, back to maybe the Airbnb example, like if you're thinking about the idea that, okay, people will stay in other people's houses if there's a efficient trust system on both sides where people have their real identities and they're really rating each other and things like that. Then on top of that, you build sort of a product. But like, how does that actually take place? How does that actually manifest itself? Can change. I think when you're changing, so those are common. And I think with startups, you want to run many experiments to basically until you see what's working, until you see that churn line, as Jeff talked about, where people are sticking. They're sort of an asymptote over a while. But then if you go one layer deeper to like the insight, once you prove your insight wrong, when it's like I've taken every approach to this and it does not seem to be resonating, I don't know that you sort of have the foundation of a business anymore. And a lot of people will sort of continue on kind of going through the motions of something, and it may ultimately not necessarily be worth their time to do that. And so, yes, could you start something else in an industry where you have some expertise? Quite possibly, but given the way that you usually raise capital for a finite set of time, or you have some sort of runway to execute against that, a lot of times, like if the insight is fractured or incorrect, I should say, then you might have to go back to yourself and say, like, is this really an opportunity that's worth my time to pursue?
And if I can add, just kind of extending what Austin's describing, so if you take the scientific method approach, what you're doing is you're articulating a hypothesis, a belief that you have linked to this insight, and then you design an experiment that will, if successful, prove out that hypothesis to be correct, and then presumably good things will happen with your business. So question one, do you iterate versus do you pivot? The first thing you have to ask yourself is, did the experiment yield success, and yet it didn't, yield a good company or a good outcome that you're excited about, in which case maybe you ran the wrong experiment, you need to iterate, not pivot. Or was your hypothesis completely wrong, in which case you need a new hypothesis, and that new hypothesis may be a slight adjustment. You have the wrong ideal customer profile, you need to refocus on a different ideal customer profile, ideally initially very, very narrow. That's one mistake a lot of founders make, which is they pursue too big, too broad an ideal customer profile in the early days as opposed to a very narrow wedge in the market. And then, secondly, like maybe you have the wrong value proposition. Maybe the value proposition is not compelling and it must have a hair on fire value proposition, in which case maybe you need to pivot more dramatically. And speaking of kind of frameworks and metaphors, another one that I like and talk a lot about with my founders is one that Chris Dixon from Andreessen Horowitz articulates, which is the idea maze, which is as a founder, you're sort of entering this corridor and you begin to work this idea and you start taking different paths based on the experiments you run, the insights you develop, and the lessons and the results of those experiments. And each path that you take is sort of a walk down the maze. And one of the things that's very exciting, I think, about the founding journey is when you sort of open up a fruitful path. And you wouldn't have gotten there if you hadn't gone down these very, unfruitful paths, steps 1, 2, and 3. And then you have this insight and the aha moment where you say, oh, actually, that's an incredible, fruitful path. Let me go after that. So I'll just give you one brief example. People around here know the story, perhaps, of MongoDB, which is one of our portfolio companies, a very successful New York City company. Their first product was not the OpenSQL database. Their first product was a cloud hosting platform. And when they launched that, it was commoditized immediately by all these other hosting platforms. But they happened to have built their own database to instantiate and enable that platform. And they realized, you know what, people seem to really like this database we're offering. And so maybe we should scrap this whole platform idea and just focus on the database. And then they open sourced the database and downloads took off, usage took off, and the rest is history. So that was a dramatic pivot, but it was driven by these hypotheses, these experiments, and these insights, which then they iterated on through the idea maze to get to a good outcome.
So I just want to note that, with a couple of professors on this panel, we got deep into some geeky stuff, but really it was Austin who brought us to asymptotic churn lines, which I think is a special level of geekdom here. And I do like the MongoDB example of we think our business is this, we're wrong, give us a couple of months and we'll realize that we're actually sitting on something really important and enduring. And Mongo has been a great success story, so it's helped New York Tech in general. And you wrote something, Maria, about VCs effing up their portfolio companies and when they create value and when they destroy value. And we had questions about this because as you're listening, as the people sitting at Mongo are listening to what's actually happening and realizing, wait a minute, this is not working, but this other stuff is really working. How do you know when your VCs are shitting all over your company and they're completely wrong?
So, I'm so glad you teed that up because I was about to say something of the same sort. I think one of the hardest jobs for a founder is to know who to listen to and when to listen to your own gut. And I don't have any answers for that, but you will figure it out. You sometimes, you sometimes need to hear the person on your board and go, you know what, they're right. And you sometimes need to go, you're totally effing wrong, right? At the end of the day, I think just because we're sitting on a stage and we've seen companies doesn't mean we know anything, right? It doesn't happen the same way twice. And if it did, our job would have been automated away a long time ago by AI. And I think it's just changing. Like you said at the beginning, in the world of AI, just to give you an example of this whole pivot, shift, experimentation that we're talking about, if you launched a company 5 years ago, you would have probably had, let's be generous, 5 to 10 Optimizely pages, test a few different words. I met a guy 6 months ago who has an AI company. His first SMB product had 8,200 different versions. And he put paid pilots across all of those. That is a whole different level of experimentation than we've seen in the past. And so it is all new. And so you find the way to experiment that. And I always say, I did write a cheeky paper. I read a lot of AI papers last year because we were all thinking about what's defensible in AI, and I kind of went back to the source and read a number of papers, and off of the kind of initial attention is all you need paper, I wrote a paper called Value Neutral Money is All You Need. And I actually wrote it for a founder as I was courting him, honestly, as a joke. But it was also true, which is that I have these two things I hold in my head, and I don't know how they can both be true, and then I realized how they were, which is that one, VCs can truly be value additive. I've seen it. I've seen good VCs, be incredible board members, help a company in the 2 or 3 moments where it mattered, be course-changing trajectories, and just be positive I guess, partners on the human hard journey that it is to build anything enduring. And this other truth, which is that VCs don't really matter. They don't. Like, if you're going to go build this thing, you're probably going to go build it anyway, right? And like, you'll build it regardless of whether you take a term sheet from any of us. And like, a lot of the best founders will get on without you. And the reason that those two things can coexist is that because there's also a third reality, which is that there's value destructive VCs. And there's a lot of behavior that I don't condone and that we've all seen in private boardrooms and in public places. And I'm just not a fan of that. But I think that in general, if you find a board member who like pretends to know your space way better than you, you probably should run 1,000 miles the other direction. That's a good litmus test that they don't, because that's literally not the job by definition. I don't know about you, but I certainly haven't gone and interviewed 7,000 people in the last 3 months on some very specific problem set that you have done. So like, just trust your gut a little bit more on that. But I do think you want people around you who know when to push you and not just be your cheerleader, because being your cheerleader isn't doing you good service either all the time. Sometimes you do need to be pushed or say, you know what, I have seen that pattern as a VC across 30 years in lots of companies, and that pattern tends to be the same. Like, that's still true. We're still dealing with humans, which is, a huge piece of scaling a company. So I think it's about figuring out when to listen to your gut. And the litmus test I guess I'll use today, because I just saw someone recently who was helping me in my transition, and I think the pieces of advice that are probably the most right are the ones that keep coming up. Either you don't want to hear it and you're like, oh, I so disagree with that, but they keep coming back up, or you do agree and like it's even in the moment that it was said, it wasn't a big deal, but you keep coming back to it in your head, there's probably something there.
I'll just give you like a quick anecdote on Maria's point here. I was a VC-backed founder a couple times before I co-founded Flybridge. And one of my companies, we raised just under $100 million from top VCs within the first 12 months of our launch. And I had on my board and around the investor circle, John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins and David Fialco, who's the founder of General Catalyst and one of the senior partners from Greylock, one of the senior partners from GA, a gentleman named Bill Ford, who later became CEO of GA. And I'm a 30-year-old, second-time founder, but still a kind of green founder. And I would walk in the boardroom and like 2 or 3 of these really brilliant, incredibly savvy, pattern recognition, legendary investors would say, Jeff, you should go left. And then 2 of them would say, absolutely not. Jeff, you should go right. And then the board meeting would end. And I'd be like, I don't know what to do. Do I go left? Because those are really smart people with great arguments. Or do I go right? Because those were really smart people with great arguments. And at the end of the day, you just have to trust your gut and make your choice. And one of the things I see with multiple-time founders versus first-time founders is confidence in making those decisions, and therefore you make the decisions faster. You fire faster, you hire faster, you pursue a path faster. You confidently tell one of your investors, thank you for your input, I appreciate it, but I've decided to go left instead of right, much more comfortably. And I think that's an important lesson for the founders, is to skip some of those mistakes and be that confident founder that just trusts your gut, makes your decision, explains it to your team, explains it to your investors, and move on.
And there are dynamics, because one of the things that you get to do as a venture deal lawyer, where you're serving as general outside counsel to lots of companies, and there are several of our partners like Brendan and John and Meredith, where we sit in these rooms, in these boardrooms, and you see the dynamics. That part of that conversation, I'm wondering, knowing some of those egos in that room, had little to do with you and the company and had more to do with the conversation among the 4 of them and territorial pissing among the 4 of them. And you have to kind of see past some of that. Also, there are really well-intentioned, insightful venture investors who can just be wrong about stuff. And if you look at the Cambridge benchmarks on venture fund performance, you will see that they get it wrong a lot. And sometimes they don't need help getting it wrong. They do it all by themselves. And so, like, we in this room, even not up here, we have great venture investors who I think add value and listen in boardrooms, like Erica from Rain, and Annalie from Anam Cara over there from Europe, and Marie Eklund who is France's best seed investor over there, and Max Chi from Aquiline. Like, we've got great people in this room. They're definitely not right all the time, and you do have to like pick and choose a little bit. The question is, what are the repercussions of saying no and then you're wrong?
If I could say,
Yeah.
one of the a guy named Joe Fernandez, he's a multiple-time founder. He founded Clout, if you guys remember that, a while ago. And now
I was an angel investor in that.
Oh, nice. So he talked about his time at Clout. We backed his most recent company. He said that some advice that he got was, if you never listen to your board, you might get fired. If you always listen to your board, you'll definitely get fired. So it's like,
Very true.
Basically, there is a value to you having your own independent thought, obviously ingesting a lot of information from very smart people, but ultimately you can't just follow what the people are telling you to, because again, between the conflicting information and between the they're not seeing what you're seeing, it's impossible for them to, you definitively are in a better position to make.
I mean, just
Go on.
just to give a quick inconvenient truth about our business. People talk about the power law game, not to be too wonky, but if I may, a power law is a asymptotic curve
I love you.
where, thank you, appreciate you, where one or two of our investment outcomes far outweighs and has an outsized to the right of the distribution curve result as in terms of generating returns. So what that means in our business is that in a portfolio of, let's say, 40 companies that we may construct in a fund, for every MongoDB that we might have in a fund, you're going to have a handful of good companies, one outlier like a Mongo, and then 28 to 35 absolute zeros to just get the money back or get a little bit more than your money back. So it's not just that we're wrong some of the time, just to be clear, we are wrong most of the time, and actually kind of 80% of the time. So, this saying about if you bat 300, you fail 7 times out of 10, you can still be a Hall of Famer. We can fail 8 or 9 times out of 10 and still generate a good return if we're right just that one time.
There's a practical tip here about boards. I was having this chat actually with General Atlantic randomly and some other investors last night at a dinner, and I think founders, it's one of the few areas where founders really underestimate their power. You have a ton of power in the boardroom, and don't think that you don't. I think most venture, first of all, most boards are broken. Out of 20 I've been a part of, I think there's 2 high functioning, if I'm being generous. And most of them, you need to think about the board as a group on its own. It can change the course of your future. And those 4 people, to Ed's point, have a relationship. And so how do you think about creating a culture of the board so that you can have more productive dialogues with them? But most VCs, if you as a founder say, here's how we're going to run the board meeting. These are the 3 actual challenges I care about. I'm going to send you a report card in advance. You read it. If you don't read it, I'm not answering a question about it. Whatever it is, you pick how you want to run it. But I don't think most founders, until their second or third go around, realize that you can start the conversation. So it's actually a lot easier to not say yes or no to advice if it's structured differently. If you say, here's the 3 biggest challenges that I have, and I want your input, and I will let you know what I decide after I think about all of your input, but I'm not going to decide today because I want to really think about what you're saying. You actually have control so long as the VCs get the reporting that they need, they know what you're doing, they know how you're running the company. There's a lot of formats in which you can have that conversation where you have a lot more control over what the outcomes of that conversation are. And actually, it's quite much more engaging for the people showing up to that meeting. There was one founder who ran a board like that all the time, and it was a work of art. But it's a very rare thing.
And just a quick plug for upcoming Lowenstein programming. Our Women in VC event on October 30th is about board dynamics and when you're in the boardroom with 2 X chromosomes, particular challenges that we tend to face when we are the only one there. So please do join us for that.
Can we talk a little bit about, so our founder, before this session, the founders in the current crop of Venture Crush FG companies wanted to talk about product market fit and launch, but they also wanted to talk about what they always want to talk about, which is getting some frickin' money in the door from investors. And a question that seems to come up at every session, and we've been doing Venture Crush since March of 2000. We've been doing these pods in this Venture Crush FG program since 2008, and it's just never going to stop coming up, is how do you get the planes to land even after you've gotten, an individual yes? So let's say that, one of the premier venture funds based in New York is 645 Ventures. We're excited to have Vardon in the back of the room, who's a 645er, and I'm proud to say a former student, because he made the right choice and went to the Better Business School, which is right here in New York, Columbia. And right, Erica, you with me on this? And you've got this meeting coming up. What is going to sway the fund about what you're going to do going forward and where you've already been? What things make it look like you're actually worthy of their seed capital? And also, there was a question, what does seed mean to you? Because you shouldn't be asked about product market fit at seed, right? Like you shouldn't, let alone pre-seed, that phrasing should never enter the room in a pre-seed funding conversation. Okay, great. Terrific.
I disagree.
Good.
Because
Tell us why you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
Welcome to New York.
We'll see. I think that you need to have a clear point of view about your ideal customer profile, about your value proposition. You have to have done your homework on customer discovery. You have to have run some experiments that surface perhaps some early data on maybe unit economics and have a theory of why you can make money. And ideally, you've run some tests, since it's so easy and so cheap to do these MVPs and to do the thousands of experiments that Maria articulated, that you should have some data on maybe conversion rates or reactions to value propositions or wait lists, some early data that signal demand. And I would tell you that if you are sitting back and saying, I don't have to do product market fit, I'm just going to be a great team, I'm going to tell you what a great background I have, and I'm going to tell you my great idea, you're not going to clear the bar. Because the bar is really freaking high right now, because great founders are being 10x founders, and they're shipping products faster, getting feedback faster, getting early signs of product market fit faster with less capital. And therefore, they are able to tell a great, compelling story. And also, they're able to show the movie, not the snapshot. They're showing us, like, here's what I did 30 days ago, here's what I did 15 days ago, here's what I did today, here's what I'm going to do in 30 days, 60 days. And we can start seeing that trajectory and extrapolating, and that gets us excited.
Would you say that's pre-seed and seed, or are you talking seed?
I would say both. Like just to be clear, Flybridge is a pre-seed and seed fund, so that's our bread and butter. We invest $500,000 to $3.5 million, and I would tell you that our recent pre-seeds and seeds, folks are in the game with MVPs, getting customer feedback in market, getting early signs of product market fit.
I just did 3 deals, and I think only one of them had anything remotely to go off of, if we're being honest. I don't disagree with you. I think the bar is exceptionally high right now. For me, at pre-seed, it's really about team and market, and my belief that they can build what they say they're going to build. At seed, it's a little bit different, and there's a valuation associated, but it's all blurred at this point. Like, great teams that have nothing are going out and raising $5 million. And people are still raising $1 million. It's all blurred today. What I would say is advice. I'll try and give you a little bit of maybe different advice, because I think there's a lot of great resources on the internet around how to go fundraise. I think people forget to put yourself in the human shoes on the other side of the VC, meaning you have a deeply held belief about what you're building and why. Do a little homework, like Ed and Meredith have done, about going and reading whatever we posted and talked about recently and whatever. Figure out who this person is. First of all, you got to find your tribe, which you said earlier, who's going to get this? And chances are, if you're pitching and hitting brick walls, it's the wrong walls. Like there are walls that you're just going to walk through and it's going to feel like a door just opened. So find the people, because everyone wants to go pitch these like top 10 names all the time. There's literally thousands of VCs. And the worst thing you can do is go pitch 10 people, get a no, and just keep going, and then it takes you forever. So figure out who you think your tribe is, and then find a way to explain what you believe and why. And the more memorable, unique way you can do that, the better. Even small differences, like I am sometimes having 13 back-to-back Zoom calls that are founder pitches. Those aren't my favorite days, but they happen often. And like, I just remember in COVID, for some reason, this one female founder who I didn't back, but she had an enterprise company, just literally opened with a question. She's like, let me ask you 3 things. And she asked me 3 things. They turned out to be relevant to her business, but it was just a different way to start the conversation. And when you're having so many back-to-back Zooms, is what stands out and speaks to this person to help convey what you believe in a way that they can see it. And I think the in a way that they can see it piece is often lost. It's often, here's a canned pitch, which is no fun for you to deliver, quite frankly, because you're running Groundhog's Day, and is not so fun to hear on the other side either.
There are 2 things that were said a couple times that is worth repeating a third time. One, the bar being high. What that means in practice is you are not just competing with the other people in your industry for capital or the people who are on your 2x2 matrix. You are competing with the last person that pitched that VC and the person who's pitching right after, who have nothing to do with your business. You are competing for that capital, meaning you have to be certainly the most compelling thing that I've seen today, but probably more the most compelling thing I've seen this month or in the last 2 months. And so entering it with that framework, I mean, and I'm statistically, that's it. We look at about 2,000 companies a year. We invest in 10. So, you could do the math on what that works out to, less than 1%. And these are companies that, that all kind of are presenting different things. So you do have to have a lot of clarity around how you're presenting. So, I really like that idea. The other thing that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we have a program called Friends and Family, which is our accelerator program that is for very, very early stage. What we recognize being a very inclusive firm, a lot of the people that we backed, even people that come from disadvantaged backgrounds or whatnot, the people that ended up getting in front of us that we were backing, even at pre-seed and seed, the very earliest stages theoretically there are, a lot of them had raised a little bit of capital from friends and family that helped them, either buy their first bit of inventory or help them hire a software developer or a team or something like that to augment whatever their founding team was. And we realized that this is an actual hurdle for a lot of the communities that we're serving, where people don't have a friends and a family member that could give them a 5 or 6 figure check. So we're actually doing our 3rd cohort. Our applications open in October 1st. It's a $300,000 investment for very, very early stage companies. If you have your team together and you have something, maybe not as far as what Jeff described, but you have some insights and you're working on it and building it out, I'd encourage you to check it out. It's all over our website, Slauson & Co. But the idea was to give enough capital where people can actually execute against that idea and run for a little bit, have a little bit of runway. So I just, really sort of want to reemphasize what you guys were talking about with the bar. I think that's you really have to frame your positioning and finding your tribe around that. It's worth taking the extra time because otherwise you're talking to somebody. And when you do find the person that's a good investor for you, it will feel way easier than everybody else.
So high bar, great. I mean, not in San Francisco, let's be real.
Yeah.
But I saw in your face and your forward cant that you were definitely going to disagree with Jeff before about product market fit being a necessary thing.
I didn't say necessary, to be clear.
In the pre-seed to seed, not necessary, but
Let me put it this way. Maria meets 10 founders tomorrow. It's just another Thursday for Maria. And one of those 10, all seed stage, has early signs of product market fit that are promising. Not definitive, but promising. Who's she gonna do a second meeting with.
You're assuming all other things are equal, which they
All other
which
things
they
equal.
which they never are.
Sure, right.
But yeah,
But-
okay.
That's the bar is freaking high. That's just the reality.
So that was, I think, and there was a nuance with even how Jeff said, which was around like they have sort of visibility to product market fit versus like achieving. They in pre-seed for us, you don't have to have achieved product market fit yet. But there is, we have to basically be able to see a path, which and the only way we see it is if you articulate it as a founder or
Damn.
I mean,
I'll give you one example
Yeah.
just to be very tangible. So we just invested in a vertical SaaS company that's AI forward, very narrow vertical. And I said to the team, it seemed very compelling. They have a great background. They had a great earned secret, I thought, in terms of their insight. And I said to the team, well, how much customer discovery have you done? And they said, well, you know the ideal customer profile we described? I said, yeah. They said, we've talked to 70 of them. Like sit down, face-to-face, or Zoom calls with 70 of them. And we've got 3 LOIs signed. Even though we haven't built the product yet, we've just told a handful of them, look, if we do the following, would you buy? And they were willing to sign an LOI. Now, that's an early sign to me of product market fit because they did a bunch of cold outbound. They got a ton of reaction. People were willing to spend time with them on the phone. They gave me the transcripts and gave me the briefing. And they also got early LOIs, even though they haven't even written a line of code yet. Like, that's a pre-seed,
Yeah.
3 million on 15 post type of classic pre-seed company. But they have early signs and early indications of product market fit.
I think talking to a lot of customers is a key hack because a lot of people talk to like 20 or 30. And I actually think for you, if you talk to like 200, you'll learn a lot more, or 70. But I actually think, to your point about the 10 a day, and I'm curious for you now on this, I don't know if I would have always gone for the one that has signs because it depends a lot on the space that they have those signs in, right? So like,
Sure.
and you can also have domain expertise in lieu sometimes of product market fit. So I think about a seed that I just did, and it's a deep AI bio deal. Very few people on the planet have the depth in bio and in AI that this particular team has, or could build it quickly. And so like, they don't have anything, but I believe that they understand this market very well. But what they did that I thought was really smart is like, I did my own research, I did my own calls in this particular sector, but my ability to get to like very famous people in this particular biosector is like pretty stumped. And so they actually took the notes of the meeting and they put it in the data room. They had like, here's all of our meeting notes that we emailed back to the person, and they either said, yes, I agree, or I disagree here. And like, to me, that was a data point around product market fit, even if there's no traction, that there's something there. So there's unique ways to show it. What were you gonna say?
I'm sorry. This is sort of also the other point that I forgot to mention about what I strongly agreed with you both on, which was around like you also taking information in finding your tribe. I personally think that the best way to set the tone for a conversation is exactly what you said. Have 3 questions that you ask that help you narrow in on what the investor is looking for. For example, there are some investors that come from product backgrounds. They're like, I don't care about your team. I don't care about whatever. If you build something cool, I'm going to get behind it. And you talking to them about all this is just totally off base. There are other investors that's like I'm not a product person, so I'm going to look at the numbers to see, like, it doesn't matter what I think about, this product. If you're showing me something that demonstrates this, then great. So, but the only way I think that you could arrive at who that investor is and how they make decisions is by asking questions. And I think it also sets the tone for being more conversational. We found that like a lot of people just jump into their pitch. And so one of the things we kind of proactively do is if you have a pitch meeting with Slauson, the first 3 minutes are us telling you everything about how we invest, how our process is, what we invest in, what we like, what we look for, all kinds of things like that. We try to be as transparent as possible. I think most VCs would be transparent, but nobody ever asks them anything. And so the idea of just taking the time to just unpack what it is that they're looking for so you can know to direct your conversation and your pitch that way, I think will go a very long way.
So I've got a very quick just yes, no question for each of you. I want to do one quick thing, and then Meredith is going to wrap for us. LOIs in a meeting or in a deck or in your diligence, more important to have an LOI or more important to have Or you don't need the LOI as long as you have forward-leaning pilot customers?
What's the yes, no in that question?
More important to have an LOI
Or?
or to not have an LOI, but to have other people, to have customers that are like, they don't need to
LOI better
formalize it.
than no LOI, yes. Signed customer with revenue better than an LOI,
Sure.
yes.
But-
I'll say no.
All right, expand briefly. You've
No.
got 400 words a minute. You can do it. You can do
I
it.
mean, honestly, it's out of the thousands of things that I look for that boil down to a couple in each deal. It's about what wins in a certain space in a team. Like, in some cases, an LOI matters. It's not the top of my list.
Got it.
I would agree. Not top of my list. LOIs are great indications, but like we're backing. I mean, founder market fit, which we didn't really talk much about, but it's conceptually pretty easy to wrap your head.
And how did you get those LOIs? That's another very important question. If it's like your friends of friends, I was most impressed by a founder in the UK who cold outbounded on LinkedIn like 50 people who he put up something and then he got LOIs because they had that real problem. Versus like you can probably through your network get 3 people.
Early signs of founder market fit, high response rate to a value proposition over cold LinkedIn.
Great. That's great.
All right.
All right, so-
I have one more question before we wrap
Go,
up.
yeah, please.
And it's a little bit different, and it's going back to trusting your gut and making a quick decision. Maria, can you tell us a little bit about how you think about personal presentation? Promised we'd talk about this.
Oh,
and
yes, yes.
I want to
Thank
hear
you.
your thoughts on this one.
So I've never really talked about this publicly, so this might just get awkward, but sorry if it does, bear with me. As I went to go pick out my outfit yesterday, I really appreciated the heads up about the director's chairs. Don't want to be wearing anything short up here. I thought about how women think about how they dress. And there's kind of two things. It's been one of those things where I evolved, and I have changed how I think about myself in this capacity, and I thought it might be interesting to talk about in a room like this. My first job out of undergrad was GE Healthcare Manufacturing, and I've always been, for lack of a better word, this probably isn't the right PC word, but a bit girly. And the manufacturing shop floor environment of like oversized pants and steel-toed shoes is not exactly that. And I really remember the very first executive that I had that just to me seemed a bit more girly. And it's just like this idea that you have people that somehow look like you might look like. Whether it's Marie Eklund pitching on this stage 7 years ago, being a woman who I knew raised 200 million in Europe on her own was like, whoa, you need these people. But I think sometimes, at least for me, we as women spend far too much time thinking about what we look and how we show up. And, I rolled in on a red eye and you can probably tell and that's okay. But I think that there was a video, and I'll have that send it around, at this women's conference that I went to in 2017 by Jill Solomon, and it changed the way that I think about this. And she basically rolled out dressed as a guy, and she had a lot of provocative things she says. I'll let her say it better than I will. But she's talked about makeup specifically, and she said, I one day was thinking as I was getting ready for a panel, like, why are they putting another face on my face? Like, is my face not good enough? But then she goes on to say, like, when is makeup helpful and when is it not? And I just think, as someone who just lived in Europe for 3 years where people wear a lot less makeup, for myself, I think I used to feel uncomfortable going on something publicly recorded or on LinkedIn or whatever if I didn't look a certain way. And I was like, those minutes are also valuable. Those extra 15 minutes every morning is times I can play with my kid before I go to work or do something else. And like, maybe my husband's like reading an interesting article that's making him smarter and I'm sitting here doing I'm wearing makeup right now and I like to use self-expression and look a certain way. But I think she really shifted how I think about it. And a lot of times I really think about when I feel empowered by it versus when I feel handicapped by it or it's expected. And I've, in many cases now, been on LinkedIn with no makeup on maternity leave doing a podcast and just being like, this is also just me and that's okay. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves permission and the permission structures to show up how we want to show up. And that might be different than how we think people expect us to show up. So for what it's worth.
Awesome.
I appreciate that.
So I have one ask, and then we'll end with Meredith. And my ask is, so I have a friend who I've known for years, who's super smart, high integrity, amazing work ethic, charismatic, funny, kind person, a Brown University alum. I have special fondness for Brown University, and has worked in health tech as an investment professional and also as a financial analyst, and happens to be here today. His name is Evan Imegwu. And I'm looking for people in health tech, and particularly at venture funds, who will sit down and have a conversation. And there are a couple of things that in particular that I want to have happen in those conversations. So come find me just right outside this room after, or come find Evan. He's floating around here someplace. So that's my one ask. All right, back to you, Meredith.
That wraps us up today. I think we all have a lot to continue talking about. There's drinks, there's food. For those of you on Zoom, thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you next time.